Hi everybody, Lynn Cox here, clinical hypnotherapist. I help women who have gotten out of domestic violence relationships and also experienced childhood abuse, um, hopefully more quickly overcome some of the residual impacts of those experiences in their lives. Anyway, I'm hopping on today to talk about what I coined in a story, the injustice system. Now, that was a bit tongue in cheek and not meant to make light of something that is a really serious issue for both people who have experienced being with a violent partner, who've had violence committed against them, both as adults, as well as people who were abused, assaulted as children. Because these are very serious matters, they're criminal matters. Uh, Physical, sexual abuse, absolutely. Those are criminal in Canada. I believe they're criminal in most countries in this world. I haven't quite looked at all. So when I say the injustice system, what am I talking about? I'm talking about how people experience the the pathway of going the justice system route. So reporting and perhaps getting or perhaps having the perpetrator who committed these crimes against them charged criminally, and whether that's a criminal charge which results in jail time or fines or what have you. But I'm going to start off. We are kind of interesting in our culture where we tend to look to a lot of facts, data, statistics, even when it comes to things like domestic violence and abuse. Tend to there's often a lot of reports on, okay, what is the financial impact of that? And I want to be really clear here that I'm sharing some of this information just to kind of make it clear to anyone who hopefully who's listening to this, just to get an idea of how prevalent these challenges are with the injustice system that we seem to be living in. Definitely here in Canada, definitely in the States, and many European countries, etc. But statistics and those numbers that showcase how many of these criminals are actually officially charged, and where there's some, I will use in air quotes, some sense of justice delivered, and just through that system, that doesn't quite cut it. That doesn't quite cut the the really potentially detrimental impacts it can have on somebody's soul, their feeling of being a whole person. Residual impacts of often can be depression, anxiety, addiction, you know, going from being abused as a child into future violent relationships where that cycle continues. Um, Statistics and things like this don't fully address how deeply traumatizing on the spirit and the human experiencing these things can be. And I always couch that with, there is and are ways to recover and to get back to who you are, and to be able to not feel shame, not feel guilt, not feel like you're a bad person, not feel like you're at fault. So I want to be careful to say that as well too, because many people do experience these horrific experiences, and through through even some of them just have a perspective without even going into therapy, where they're able to make meaning out of the experience and still feel happy, healthy, whole, with a sense of good self-esteem, care for themselves, and have healthy relationships. Some people can do that without any types of help or therapy. But then there also are a whole bunch of therapies out there, and I am a firm believer that a few that really work well are working with their subconscious to really shift any false beliefs that you may have acquired by experiencing these things. Shifting your whole perspective of who you are, how you relate to that experience can greatly improve the quality of your life. So that's really effective. And also a lot of the somatic healing. That's becoming more and more popular, specifically yoga, walking, martial arts, and then things like I put up a little picture of my doggy today. I found an old picture and just made the note that he saved my life because he was the impetus for my my deep feeling of need to make sure that I stayed out of a violent relationship, because for a little period of time I was more concerned with even what the impact of my dog being around that person would be than myself. But then through some different methods, I then was able to recognize that it was really myself. But he played a big part in that. So animals, dogs, cats, pets, they can be extraordinarily healing. So back to the injustice system. And I am going to talk about some stats because these things are pretty important to address. And they're depending on which sources you're using, which country, who's collecting the data, these numbers vary. But we'll look at it from the perspective of, I think they're pretty generally, in general terms, we could assume that they're close to accurate based because I've looked at a number of different resources. So I'm going to talk about childhood sexual abuse first. So this is interesting. So this statistic says that the majority of adult survivors, and it's adults who I work with. I don't work with children, and I don't work with people who are currently in a violent situation. I work with adults who've experienced abuse or adults who are out of an abusive relationship as adults. But the majority of adult survivors of child sex abuse report that they did not disclose the abuse to anyone when they were children. And then 93% of child abuse cases are never brought forward to police or child welfare. 93%. And then this stat about what percentage of abuse cases go unreported. So this one's talking about domestic violence. So it's saying that about 1 in 4 women, again, average, will experience violence at the hands of a partner, and nearly half of those go unreported. So half. So if you think about the fact that women make up the entire population, and then you go, okay, 25%, so 25% of half, and then half of those, that is an enormous amount of people where those cases go unreported. Here's a few more. This one talks about reasons that victims choose or not choose to disclose. And so with relation to sexual violent crimes, some reasons why people decided, I'm going to start with not to report or disclose, include fear of retaliation, okay? A high belief that police wouldn't do anything to help. And then the same amount, 13%, believing it was a personal matter. So by personal matter, I interpret that as thinking like, well, we don't need to involve anybody else in this private business. And then almost 10% thinking it wasn't important enough to report. 7% not wanting to get the perpetrator in trouble. And 30% just gave another reason or didn't cite a reason. Here are some reasons why people do and have decided to report these particular crimes. Almost 30% to protect the household or victim from further crimes by the offender. So this might include somebody else trying to report it as well. A quarter to stop the incident or prevent reoccurrence or escalation. 20%-ish to improve police surveillance or believing they had a duty to do so. So this comes into play when, and I've heard accounts of this on numerous occasions, many people who decide to report later in life, so let's say they were assaulted as children, and as adults decide to report, often feel like, who else might this person be abusing and assaulting? Feeling the duty to report it to potentially prevent other people from being assaulted or abused. I'm just thinking of the famous case in Canada. Sheldon, I'm sorry, I can't remember his last name, but he was an NHL hockey player abused by a hockey coach. And I think Theo Fleury, I think it was the same coach, but it was like he reported and then other people came forward and then it was I believe he was sentenced to a prison term, the perpetrator. I can't remember his name, but the dominoes started to fall at that point in time. So it's that kind of idea. Um, and then, yeah, some wanted to kind of get help or recover loss. So, these are not very wonderful statistics to talk about. And what else I want to talk about is how difficult of a situation it can be for people who have experienced this to go this route. I've heard a variety of different accounts. Some who just had horrific experiences needing to disclose the detail. Some being in a situation in a courtroom where the lawyer defending the lawyer defending the perpetrator, tried to make it appear as if it was her fault he had sexually molested her because she was perhaps too provocative. As a minor, I might add, which is absolutely just horrific. Um, a case where a man was assaulted in his teenage years by men, was threatened with a gun that if he ever told, and I don't know if they said that what they would do, but I think that threat, and then in his 40s recounting that experience, but actually on the spot regressing to this almost like regressing back to that point in time in fear and terror, like that kind of a response, as if all of those years hadn't gone by, and even being a far geographic distance away, and logically speaking, being safe in that moment, but still having that traumatic imprinted fear response. People going this route as well, it taking, our court systems, and I think in the US as well as Canada, they can be very costly, very very time consuming. And so this span of time that is attached to anything that's going through the court or I would say the injustice system, it could be so extraordinarily stressful is a light way to say it. Tormenting is more of a way that many people describe that experience. The waiting. And then the other thing that happens is often people who have been assaulted, abused, who go this route are waiting for the justice to come. And by justice, I mean a guilty verdict or some kind of punishment through the legal system. And then, even when that does happen, feeling that nothing's improved for them anyway. Like it's almost like waiting for that to happen and thinking that they're going to feel better, and then after all of the time and the painful experience of going through that, still not feeling better in themselves. So you know what, it's no wonder that a lot of people struggle with this. It's no wonder that so many people end up saying, well, maybe it's not as important, or maybe it's not so important, or do I really want to go through that where I'm going to have to, perhaps if it's a family member who's abused them, well, do I really want them to get punished? And that all sorts of these things go on in the minds of people who have experienced childhood abuse and domestic violence. It is really complicated, and it can be very confusing and very distressing. And so, from that perspective, because also this is the way our mind works, we want to move towards comfort and away from discomfort. Sometimes, though, that process can be something like in the case where I believe it was about 25% say their reason for going ahead and reporting is to make sure that the abuse stops with other family members, or as hopefully a safeguard against that person being able to continue to assault or abuse anyone else. Really challenging situation, and then to not necessarily feel this big sigh of relief or feel like something is better can be very distressing. The other thing too is a lot of people deliberate this decision for a very long time, and then they'll go and do research. The internet and our easy access to information is both a blessing and a curse. And often we'll read these very I would say these very disturbing statistics on how these processes go. And I do wonder how many decide after reading these low rates of reporting and low rates of conviction and high rates of prevalent abuse, if that impacts their decision to report it to our injustice system. I don't know what kind of justice there can be with when somebody has experienced abuse, violence, trauma. The longer I'm here on the planet and the more I know and have experienced, and the more people who I hear from, the more I'm convinced of a couple of things. And this is my opinion. This is my opinion based on my experience. So take it with a grain of salt. Number one, I think that it is, I'll go back to this quote that I put up from Gandhi, where he talked about, I believe his specific quote was talking about the strength of a nation, or the greatness of a nation, is basically can be measured, so to speak, by how it treats its weakest and most vulnerable members. And frankly, I would consider children to be our most vulnerable. And these rates of abuse against children, and particularly sexual abuse, are absolutely gobsmacking horrific. But that the health or the greatness of a nation could be measured by that. And I would say the maturity of a society. And then by maturity, I mean, I think most people agree that any kind of violence, physical violence, sexual violence, are an absolutely not, they're absolutely criminal, and they are criminal in our injustice systems. But just from a human perspective, those are some of the worst crimes that can be committed against another human. But we live in these cultures with these, systems in place, and I'm tongue in cheek, the injustice system, as well as kind of polite society. I mean, and if you kind of look at things and look at what people, causes that people get worked up about, and causes that tend to gain, I would say, popularity. Well, look at the Me Too movement. What happened there? And I'm not dismissing that, because I'm totally against sexual violence, sexual assault, imbalance of power dynamics. Why isn't there the same kind of outrage if we look at, maybe 1 in 6 or 1 in 4 girls? Same thing goes with violence against women. There are differences between women and men. Women are smaller, have less muscle mass, and the percentages, I don't have this stat right in front of me. I did read it not that long ago, but most violence against women is committed, pardon me, against men. So where's the outrage in that? I mean, we talk about systemic structures and racism, and look at what happened. The wave of awareness and concern with the George Floyd incident. So where's that? So why is it that some of these things some of these, we'll call them wrongs against humanity, become areas of concern while others don't? And I would suggest that children, number one, should always be number one priority. That's my personal opinion. I know a lot of people who are parents or aunts and uncles and grandparents, and I think that they would probably all agree. So why does this perpetuate? One of my thoughts on this is because this largely goes unreported. The other thing I think too, I was curious about it. I was talking with somebody about, oh yeah, Singapore. Friends of ours were in Singapore not that long ago. And it's kind of, I think, a widely known fact that Singapore is very orderly and very clean. And I think I've heard somewhere that, you're not even allowed to chew gum outside. And I was curious. I was like, well, what's up with Singapore? And they have strict punishments and penalties for certain things. So it's my personal opinion that perhaps there's not widely widely enough strict enough penalties against people who commit violence against women and violence and abuse against children. Perhaps that's part of what's missing. The thing is, if these cases go unreported, then it's all kind of a circular loop. But for the people who are the ones who need to report it, who've had the experience themselves, so then need to be the ones to report it, all of these other reasons why they don't, which are reasonable and which are totally understandable. If you look at the whole system, which I will call the injustice system. So I don't have any answers to that. The best answer I can offer, and it only comes because of the work that I do and the particular perspective I have, because we all have different perspectives, histories, experiences, is that once you're an adult, and if you do have the misfortune of having had experienced abuse when you were a child or abuse when you're an adult and have escaped a domestic violence relationship, that really focusing on how can you more effectively heal the emotions, memories, health, wholeness of yourself, and do give strong consideration perhaps to reporting. And there are there's other organizations out there who assist with people in going through what can be a very unpleasant system, we'll say, the injustice system, but to consider that, but not to hinge your, we'll call recovery, healing, return to wholeness, not to hinge that on the outcome. That can be difficult to do, but that's not impossible. And that might give you the chance to be to have a greater experience of life. And then it's when you're feeling more whole, peaceful, calm, strong, confident, loving yourself, respecting yourself. That's something that's an amazing thing to contribute to yourself, a gift to give yourself. You may not see it at this point in time, but it is, and also to contribute to the wider whole. A lot of people who have had these experiences then go on to be great advocates. They go on to be lawyers and judges and police officers and doctors and nurses and therapists, because they have a deep empathy. They have what's coined the lived experience, but they have experience, so they have empathy. And then after being able to do a level of healing experience on themselves, then be able to say, you know what, this is really important to me, so then therefore I'm going to go ahead and give back in this way. But that's not to say you have to do that if you've had that experience, but that's some of the silver lining perspective of going through those experiences. So that's my food for thought, the injustice system. And you know what, I'm not meaning to make a light joke out of it, but I do look at that and go, oh sheesh, can't we do better here as a modern society and a modern culture who says that we value humanity and value people and have certain values. So it's that disconnect between what do we say we value and then what do we actually value. So just some food for thought. But to everybody who has had these experiences, I understand, I'm not making light, and there is a lot that can be done to more quickly adjust your perspective, your inner feelings about how you feel about that experience. There shouldn't be any guilt, there shouldn't be any shame. in that, and that being able to feel better is totally possible. So those are my thoughts for now. I hope everyone's doing well, and I'll be on soon.